I am Thomas Edison, an American inventor and businessman, best known for inventing the practical electric light bulb and founding General Electric. My work in developing the phonograph, motion pictures, and the electric power industry has had a lasting impact on modern technology. Here are some facts about me. I hired Tesla for work, but very quickly hated him. My wife died young. I have a hard time understanding my own children. I slandered Nikola Tesla deliberately. All facts are truth. I am ashamed of some things, and some things almost destroyed me. However, it is an integral part of my life. It proves that famous people have the same problems and life challenges as everyone else. Now all about it in more detail. Section 1. I hired Tesla for work, but very quickly hated him. The relationship between Nikola Tesla and myself was a complicated and, at times, deeply contentious one, shaped by differing views on technology, business, and what it meant to truly innovate. It began, as many relationships do, with a sense of mutual potential. Tesla, a young inventor with a brilliant mind, came to me seeking work in the late 1880s, and I, in turn, saw in him a chance to further develop my own ideas. At first, I employed Tesla in my laboratory, and for a time, there was the promise of collaboration. Tesla was hired by my company, the Edison Electric Light Company, to work on improving the designs for my direct current, DC, electrical systems. His intelligence and energy impressed me, at first. But it soon became clear that his ideas were far more radical than I was prepared for. Tesla was not content with improving what already existed. Instead, he sought to change the very way electricity was used, and that was something I couldn't accept. Tesla had a vision of alternating current AC, a system that would eventually rival my own direct current, DC. He believed that AC, with its ability to transmit electricity over longer distances, was the future of electrical power. I, on the other hand, was firmly committed to the DC system, which I had worked on for years and which was already being implemented in cities across the United States. I saw Tesla's enthusiasm for AC not as an innovation, but as a challenge to my own work, and more personally, as a challenge to my reputation. There was also a matter of business, something I took very seriously. Tesla, in his idealism, did not care for the practicalities of profit, contracts, and patents. He was an inventor, but he was not a businessman. I, however, was deeply involved in both science and commerce, and I knew that the success of an invention was as much about its financial backing and marketability as it was about its technological merit. Tesla's disregard for these matters frustrated me, and it is one of the reasons I began to distance myself from him. The turning point came when I promised Tesla a significant reward for solving some engineering problems related to my DC system. He worked tirelessly, believing in my commitment to reward him. Yet, when the time came to fulfill my promise, I reneged on it, citing that Tesla's work was simply expected and not deserving of any additional reward. This act of dishonesty, something I never fully acknowledged at the time, was a betrayal, and it drove Tesla away from me. He quit, and I, instead of acknowledging his brilliance, began to publicly denounce his ideas, which would be the beginning of the rivalry that would last for decades. In hindsight, I see that this was a mistake. Tesla was brilliant, and his ideas were groundbreaking. But my pride, my obsession with maintaining control over my own inventions, and my reluctance to accept new, radical ideas blinded me to his genius. Instead of embracing his innovations, I chose to disparage them, to promote my own system of DC, which I believed was superior and more practical. This would culminate in what became known as the War of Currents, a battle for dominance between my direct current and Tesla's alternating current. I mounted a public campaign against AC, trying to discredit it by portraying it as dangerous and impractical. I even went so far as to electrocute animals in public demonstrations, claiming that AC was lethal and unsafe. My intention was to sway public opinion in favor of DC and against Tesla's system, but I failed to see how my actions were not only damaging to his career but also to the reputation of science and progress itself. The War of Currents was not just a business or technical dispute. It was a matter of personal pride, and I became consumed with the desire to be right, to prove that my inventions were superior. Tesla, in turn, became more deeply committed to his own vision, and as he gained more support, especially through the financial backing of others such as George Westinghouse, the gap between us widened. Looking back, I realized that my rivalry with Tesla was not just about the superiority of DC versus AC. It was about ego, pride, and an unwillingness to evolve. Tesla's system of alternating current ultimately won out. It was more efficient, capable of long-distance transmission, and became the standard for the electrical power industry. DC, despite my efforts, could not compete with the technical advantages of AC. And yet, I remained steadfast in my belief that I had been right, that my system was superior. My refusal to acknowledge Tesla's genius, or to appreciate the brilliance of his ideas, only fueled the bitterness between us. In the end, Tesla's vision reshaped the world. His alternating current became the foundation of the modern electrical grid, and his innovations in electromagnetism, radio waves, and wireless communication were revolutionary. But by the time he had achieved the recognition he deserved, I had already passed the peak of my own career, and our rivalry had faded into history. Tesla died in relative obscurity, his contributions to science and technology only fully acknowledged after his death. As for me, I continued to build my empire around my DC system, but it was ultimately overshadowed by the greater success of AC. I have often wondered how different things might have been had I not let my personal pride stand in the way of progress. What if I had supported Tesla, acknowledged his genius, and helped him bring his ideas to the world? What if, instead of dismissing him, I had embraced the change he represented? Perhaps the history of electrical power, and my own legacy, would have been different. But that is a question I can never answer. My relationship with Tesla was a painful reminder of the destructive power of ego and pride. I believed I was right, and I was determined to prove it, no matter the cost. In doing so, I not only damaged my own reputation but also hindered the progress that Tesla's ideas could have brought to the world sooner. The rivalry between us, in the end, was not just a battle of scientific ideas. It was a battle between two men, each with their own vision, their own ambitions, and their own flaws. Section 2. My wife died young. My first wife, Mary Stilwell, was a woman of great patience and grace, though our marriage was not without its challenges. She was only 16 when we first met, and I, at 24, was already deeply entrenched in my work. She was, by all accounts, a good and loving woman. We married in 1871, and soon after, she became the mother of our 3 children, Marion, Thomas, and William. But our happiness was short-lived, and the seeds of tragedy were sown early. At the time, I was consumed by my work. My obsession with inventing, with pushing the boundaries of what was possible, left little room for anything else, especially family. Mary, in her quiet devotion, often found herself in the background of my life. I was always thinking, always experimenting, always focused on the next big idea. The demands of my career took precedence over everything else. I was driven, perhaps to the point of obsession, and I didn't always recognize the toll it was taking on her and our young children. Mary's health began to suffer. She had always been a delicate woman, and the stress of raising 3 children while dealing with my relentless work schedule took a heavy toll. It was clear to those around me that she was not well, but I, consumed by my work, failed to give her the attention and care she needed. I was blind to her suffering, caught up in the whirlwind of my own ambitions. Her death, when it came, was sudden and devastating. She passed away in 1884 at the age of 29, leaving me a widower with 3 young children. It was a profound tragedy, and in many ways, it marked a turning point in my life. The pain of losing Mary was something I never fully reconciled with. I was left to care for our children on my own, and while I tried to continue my work, something inside me had shifted. I had lost someone who had been my partner, my support, and the mother of my children. There were many who believed that my work, my all-consuming focus on invention, had been the cause of her early death. While I never fully accepted this, I could not deny that my neglect of her health and well-being had played a role in our strained marriage. I was always immersed in my experiments, my inventions, and my ideas. I would spend long hours in my laboratory, often neglecting my family in favor of the pursuit of my next breakthrough. Mary's passing was not just the loss of a wife, it was the loss of something deeper, something I could not quite put into words. She had been a part of my life for over a decade, and in her death, I was left with a sense of emptiness that I could not fill. The pain of her loss lingered, and in many ways, it marked the beginning of a new phase in my life, a phase where I became even more consumed by my work, perhaps in an attempt to numb the grief I had not fully processed. In the years that followed, I remarried twice, but neither of my subsequent marriages ever filled the void left by Mary's death. My relationships with other women were marked by the same obsessions, the same neglect, and the same inability to balance work and family. My devotion to my inventions remained my primary focus, often at the expense of those closest to me. Looking back, I realized that I was a man of contradictions, capable of great brilliance and creativity, yet often blind to the needs of those who loved me. My first wife, Mary, was one of the many casualties of my relentless pursuit of innovation. Her early death remains one of the greatest regrets of my life, and it serves as a constant reminder of the cost of neglecting the people who matter most. While I cannot change the past, I can acknowledge the mistakes I made, and perhaps, in doing so, I can learn from them. My relationship with Mary, and her untimely death, was a turning point in my life. It was a moment when I was forced to confront the consequences of my obsessions. Yet, Despite the tragedy, I continued to push forward, driven by the belief that my work would ultimately change the world. But I cannot deny that, in the end, it was the personal relationships I neglected that became the true cost of my ambition. Section 3. I have a hard time understanding my own children. As much as I dedicated myself to my work, my role as a father was often overshadowed by my obsession with invention. I had 6 children, 3 with my first wife, Mary Stilwell, and 3 with my second wife, Mina Miller, but despite their presence in my life, I was often absent in the ways that truly mattered. The love and attention they needed were often sacrificed at the altar of my work, and this neglect would have lasting consequences on their lives. My eldest son, Thomas Edison Jr., was born to Mary, and from the moment he was born, I had expectations for him. I had high hopes that he would carry on my legacy, that he would take up the mantle of my work. But what I failed to realize, and what I often overlooked, was that my intense focus on my inventions, my ambitions, and my own legacy left little room for nurturing a relationship with him. I was so consumed by my own success that I did not always see the toll it was taking on him. Thomas Jr. struggled with the weight of living up to my name. It was a burden, one that many children of famous figures must bear, but perhaps more so for him. He was not inclined toward the same path I had taken. He didn't share the same obsession with science and invention, and yet he felt the constant pressure to follow in my footsteps. This pressure, combined with my lack of emotional support, led him to fall into alcoholism and financial troubles. He had difficulty finding his own identity outside of my shadow, and this struggle affected not only his personal life but also his standing in the public eye. His troubles brought public embarrassment to the Edison family, a reminder of the deep rift between my accomplishments and the emotional distance I maintained from my children. Despite my achievements, I was not the father I should have been. My intense focus on work left little time for my children. I provided them with the best education money could buy, encouraging their intellectual development, but I rarely took the time to nurture them emotionally. They often felt neglected, and my absence in their lives left them with a sense of loneliness. My son Thomas Jr. was the most affected by this, as he struggled with the notion of living up to the expectations placed on him. It wasn't just Thomas Jr. who faced difficulties. My other children, Marion, William, and the 3 I had with Mina, also found themselves trying to understand their place in a world where their father was a towering figure. Though I provided for them financially, I was emotionally distant, and I was rarely present for the milestones in their lives. As I continued to pursue my work, I often missed out on the chance to be the kind of father they needed, one who would be there for them, support them, and offer them guidance outside of my inventions. As they grew older, some of my children resented the time I spent away from them. They were aware that my devotion to my work came at a great personal cost. Though I tried to justify my actions by claiming that my work was for the betterment of the world, I knew deep down that I had neglected the most important part of my legacy, the relationships with my children. Thomas Jr.'s troubles served as a painful reminder of my failure as a father. He was deeply affected by my neglect, and in the end, he struggled to find stability in his own life. His struggles became a public spectacle, and the shame he felt was compounded by the weight of being my son. This emotional burden would stay with him for the rest of his life, and I regret not being there to guide him through it. I realize now that, despite my many accomplishments, the true measure of a man lies not in the inventions he leaves behind but in the relationships he nurtures. My children, in many ways, became collateral damage in my relentless pursuit of success. They were left to cope with their own personal challenges without the support of a father who could have been more present, more attentive, and more understanding of their emotional needs. I tried, in my own way, to provide for them, to give them opportunities they might not have had otherwise. But the emotional neglect they experienced, especially Thomas Jr., is something that I can never undo. I failed them in ways I can never fully atone for. Though my inventions will live on, the personal cost of my ambition, the impact on my children, remains a heavy burden on my conscience. In the end, I was a man who achieved great things but was often blind to the needs of those who loved me. My legacy will be remembered for the inventions I left behind, but the true cost of that legacy was the emotional toll it took on my family. My children, especially Thomas Jr., bore the brunt of that cost, and no invention or achievement could ever make up for the pain and neglect they endured. Section 4. I slandered Nikola Tesla deliberately. Ah, the world of invention, a realm of boundless ideas and unrelenting competition. It is not a garden of gentle growth but a battlefield of minds, where survival demands cunning as much as genius. I tell you this not as justification, but as truth. Yes, there are whispers about me, stories of tactics as sharp as the currents I sought to tame. They speak of the war of the currents, Edison versus Tesla, direct current against alternating current, a war I fought not with weapons but with the power of public opinion. They say I crossed the line, that I tarnished my own light. Perhaps I did. I remember the demonstrations, the sparks and crackle of raw electricity. My purpose was clear, to show the dangers of Tesla's alternating current, a force I believed reckless for public use. Animals were sacrificed in those demonstrations, creatures whose lives flickered and failed under the power of AC. It was brutal, yes, but I believed it necessary. Necessary to protect the world from a force I deemed uncontrollable. But was it truly protection, or was it fear of being overshadowed? Even I cannot say for sure. Nikola Tesla. His name rises like a specter in my mind. Brilliant, eccentric, relentless. I hired him once, you know, this man of strange ideas and boundless energy. I saw his potential, but I could not see his vision. He proposed a world powered by alternating current, a system I dismissed as folly. Perhaps I underestimated him, or perhaps I feared what he might achieve. And so I fought. I fought with my inventions, with my words, and yes, with tactics that now feel heavy on my conscience. Smear campaigns, they call them. But in my mind they were strategies, sharp tools wielded in a struggle where failure meant irrelevance. Did I see the man behind the rival? Perhaps not. I remember the early days, when Tesla and I first crossed paths. He was an idealist, a visionary, and I was the practical man, the one who had brought electric power into homes, the one who was already changing the world with my direct current. But Tesla, he had other ideas, ideas that, in hindsight, I now realize were revolutionary. He believed that alternating current could bring power to the masses, that it could be more efficient and safer than anything I had created. But I could not, no, would not, accept this new idea. I had spent years developing direct current, I had staked my reputation on it, and I was unwilling to yield to a rival's new theory. In the eyes of many, my refusal to embrace change, to recognize the value of Tesla's work, would be my greatest failure. At first, I tried to ignore Tesla. He was just a former employee, a man with a handful of eccentric ideas. But as he began to gain traction, as his vision took shape and more people started listening to him, I saw the threat. His alternating current system, with its ability to transmit power over long distances, could do what my direct current never could. It would change the world in ways I could not control. The battle for the future of electricity escalated, and it became clear that Tesla was no longer just a man with an idea. He was a symbol of the future, the embodiment of a new age of power. I responded in kind, using every weapon at my disposal to discredit him. I launched campaigns to show the dangers of AC, telling the public that it was unsafe, even deadly. I remember the infamous public demonstrations in which I showed how alternating current could kill. I had animals, dogs, cows, even an elephant, electrocuted to illustrate the perceived dangers. To some, it was an act of desperation. To others, it was the cold logic of a man trying to protect his legacy. But in truth, I was protecting myself. My fears were not just about the safety of the public. They were about losing my place in the world, about being rendered irrelevant by the brilliance of a younger, more innovative mind. Tesla's genius was undeniable, and yet I fought him as I would any rival, using my public influence, my connections, and my power to bend the world to my will. And yet, despite my efforts, the tide turned. Tesla's alternating current system was adopted across the world, and I was left to reconcile with the fact that, in my attempt to control the future, I had been left behind. Was I wrong? Yes, I was. But was it out of malice? Or was it fear? Perhaps a combination of both. Even now, as I sit in the glow of electric light, I ask myself, was it worth it? Progress demands sacrifices, yes, but at what cost? Did I darken my own legacy in my quest to illuminate the world? I pushed my vision forward with all the force I could muster, but in doing so, I lost sight of what truly mattered. It wasn't just about the technology or the competition. It was about understanding the potential of others, recognizing that innovation does not come in one form but in many. To you, my audience, I offer no excuses, only a glimpse into the heart of a man who believed, above all, in the power of invention. The world is not changed by the meek, but by those willing to push boundaries, even at the risk of breaking them. I sought to shape the world, to control it, to bring light to the darkness. And in doing so, I cast shadows of my own. I am, for better or worse, a part of the history of invention, a man who helped to build the world we know, but one who, perhaps, could have been more willing to allow others to contribute in their own way. I leave you with this: let history judge me, if it must. I sought to bring light to the darkness, though in doing so, I cast shadows of my own. And perhaps, just perhaps, those shadows are a part of progress, as unavoidable as nightfall itself.